刚刚杰克在这找你好像。
这个是他要我。
啊，那你是不是也在这个？
因为他给钱给我们寝室的另外一个人。他找你就是为了
这还一篇论文啊。
Okay. Hello everyone. Good afternoon and welcome back to WebArchitecture. We've got to the point in the module where effectively it kind of splits into two separate bits. So the first couple of weeks you've had have been for some of you it will be a little bit of revision, for some of you it will be the first time you've seen this, but an introduction to the overall web architecture, or at least the core bits of it. So you've had some HTML, hopefully you can now type in HTML and produce a web page. And last week I talked about the architecture overall, so the three components of it: identification, protocols, interaction, and representation, data formats. And then I looked at HTTP in more depth, and Ricky hopefully will have done a practical review on that on Friday. Where it now splits is that the sort of technical part carries on. So Ricky this week is going to be talking about CSS, so cascading style sheets, and then talking about the interaction paradigm known as REST, which we'll be using for building the architecture coursework due down here. What I'm doing in parallel with this is taking a step back. So for the next 5 or 6 weeks, I'm going to be looking not at the web per se, but at hypertext. Why? Well, as Les said in the first lecture, the web is a hypertext system. And the thing about hypertext is it existed for quite some time before the web. More to the point, there are hypertext systems out there that, even though they may have been old before the web, they can do things that the web didn't do. So a lot of this is going to be trying to some extent, expand your horizons a bit, to show you those other systems and to try and explain to you what hypertext can be looking beyond the web. So today I'm going to be looking in brief at some general terminology that we're going to use to talk about hypertext. The 2 weeks after that, I've got some historical material looking at the evolution and development of hypertext that sort of culminates, well, not quite culminates with the web. I've got a 1 week interlude in which I'll talk about other uses to which hypertext is put. You all use the web. You're used to hypertext being something that's something that's fundamentally encyclopedic, something that's used for all organising knowledge. That's not the only use to which hypertext is put, so I'm going to be talking about narrative hypertext, how we can use this technique to tell stories, and then towards the end I'm going to look at effectively two groups of systems. The systems that arose at the same time as the web from the open hypermedia community, and I'm going to look at the developments that have happened within the hypertext community and try and show where some of those bits have been picked up by the web and try and show you the bits that haven't been picked up by the web. Okay, and the coursework, you have a coursework due in the last week of term, so this is a report. I'm going to circulate the specification for this either later this week or at this lecture next week. The main reason I've held off on this so far is because this essay will cover the topics that I'm going to introduce here. Okay, any questions at this point? Right, let's carry on to hypertext then. As I've said, the point of this lecture is to try and give you some of the basic terminology when we talk about hypertext circuits, and to introduce some of the concepts that in places are different from the way the web does things. Now, as I've already said, the web is a hypertext system, which rather begs the question, well, what's hypertext then? Before I start, does anyone want to try and give me a definition of what they think hypertext means? You've been introduced to the hypertext markup language and the hypertext transport protocol. Yeah.
Something that goes beyond normal static text,
something that goes beyond normal static text, yeah, that's not bad. Software system that links documents and images together. And both of those are actually not bad definitions. The first protocol will normally be, let's go to Google and ask Google what it thinks hypertext is. So a software system that links topics on the screen to related information and graphics, so that's pretty much the definition. Or a document presented on a computer in this way. So we already have this notion that hypertext might refer both to the system and to the contents of the system. And you'll find people will often talk about hypertext meaning a collection of documents that are interlinked in some fashion. I'll tend to try and talk specifically about hypertext systems to distinguish it from the second definition here. Okay, what happens if we go back a bit? We could look back at the original coining of the term hypertext. So hypertext is a term that was invented by Ted Nelson, of whom you'll be hearing quite a bit more over the next couple of weeks. It's worth noting that even though he coined the term hypertext, he most certainly didn't invent the idea of hypertext. The notion of a hypertext, something that is moves beyond the capabilities of normal text, something that's linked, goes back considerably further. So, depending on whether you look at things that are based on computers, in which case you can look back and say it probably goes back about 2 decades earlier than him here. Or if you look at things that aren't on computers, in which case you're looking at several centuries. So his definition, I should point out the asterisks here are his footnotes. He put an awful lot of footnotes in his paper. Let me introduce the word hypertext to mean a body of written or pictorial material interconnected, so linked, in such a complex way that it could not be conveniently be presented or represented on paper. So going beyond the capabilities, the affordances of normal text. It may contain summaries or maps of its content and their interrelations. It may contain annotations, additions, footnotes from scholars who have examined it. Let me suggest that such an object and system, properly designed and administered, could have great potential for education, increasing the student's range of choices, his sense of freedom, his motivation, and his intellectual grasp. Such a system could grow indefinitely, gradually including more and more of the world's written knowledge. It's not a very snappy definition, but if you look at the intent, if you look at the ambition here, there's quite a lot here. But the key from this is it's about interconnections, and it's something that goes beyond paper. And over time, Ted has revised this. So a rather later definition from a couple of years after Hypertext is a combination of natural language text with the computer's capacity for branching or dynamic display. Well, what does he mean by branching or dynamic display here? What he's trying to get at is the idea that when you've read a piece of text, rather than just turning the page and going to the next thing, you might be presented with a choice. You could go to several different places. Again, another slightly later one from the mid-70s. By hypertext, I mean non-sequential writing. If you compare this to the way in which we read books, or perhaps if you look back at the history of writing for things like scrolls, those are inherently linear forms. A scroll in particular, you read from the top to the bottom, or from side to side if you open it that way. Books change this slightly, but fundamentally there is still a linear sequence to the pages that exist within a codex. With hypertext, we don't have that linear, that sequential sequence. So we've broken free from that constraint. Okay. Now, for most people, and I suspect this will include most people in this room, their notion of what hypertext is going to be inherently bound up with this. Should I ask if any of what? Do any of you recognise this? Those of you who were at the W3C launch last Friday night. What is it? Well, okay, so this did indeed come from CERN, so the European Centre for Nuclear Research. This is the diagram that Tim Berners-Lee drew back in about 89-ish, I think, 89, to illustrate what he meant by the web. So this was his early conceptualization of what the web would be. And if you look at the types of things that are in here, we've got documents, we've got organizational hierarchies, we've got integration of existing systems up here. To use the phrase that his manager at the time used to describe this, vague but exciting. Damning by faint praise, this was the first critical comment made on the web. And I should say that actually, from the perspective of those of us who are in the hypertext community, there's a bit of a sort of a love-hate relationship with the web. We can't deny that the web is successful in terms of scale and in terms of the breadth of documents that are available on it. But there is this sort of lingering feeling within the hypertext community that the web has maybe not missed the point, but squandered the opportunity that hypertext presented, in that a lot of hypertext systems, other than the web, are considerably more expressive and let you do things the web doesn't let you do. To use Ted's phrasing, so this was when he was the Ulster Dinner speaker at a conference here in '97. The reaction of the hypertext research community to the World Wide Web is like finding out that you have a fully grown child and it's a delinquent. And he's not alone in thinking this. There are quite a few people in that community who look at the web and say, yeah, it's all very well, but why doesn't it do this, this and this, which our system did? One of the topics that I'll probably give you for your essays will be to look at this. You know, are these alternate webs, these other hypertext systems, could you grow them to the size of the web? A slightly more local definition of the web. So this is from a book that Wendy Hall wrote back in 1999. So she was, for many years, the sort of key player in the hypertext group here in Southampton. And it's a very awkward definition. What's hypertext? An application which uses associative relationships, links, among information contained within multiple media data, so not just text, for the purpose of facilitating access to and manipulation of the information encapsulated by that data. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue, I have to say. Okay, so I've shown you a bunch of different definitions, some better than others. How would I try and describe what hypertext is? Well, for me, the core of hypertext is non-linearity. So the idea that there's not just one path through the text. You don't just start at the beginning and work through to the end, but you're given points where you can make a choice about what you read next. So effectively, rather than having a document which has a single reading through sequence through it, there are many different ways in which that document can be read, many different pathways of links and fragments that we can follow through this. But this is just to look at it from the perspective of the person who's reading it. Hypertext should be written to as well as read, and this is one of the places where the web has not always lived up to the promise. So, hypertext needs to be about things like annotation and commentary. I read something, I can make a comment on it, I can annotate it, I can keep those things private, I can share them with other people. Other people can comment on my comments and so on. So effectively, when I comment, I add another document into the hypertext that's interlinked with everything else. And a large part of this is these links that exist between documents are not purely navigational links, even though the web makes them that way. The links that exist between documents are associations between the underlying ideas that exist in those documents. So you can view hypertext in a very reductive way and just say it's about the links, but actually the links are the sort of concrete representations of something conceptual that's more fundamental. Fundamentally, hypertext systems, readers and writers should be equal. Anybody should be able to read things, anybody should be able to write to things. Now, this doesn't play well with the sort of web view of things. So the idea on the web that somebody else might write things on your web page is taken as anathema. Within the hypertext community, that very much wasn't so. And in fact, when people have at times tried to introduce some of these ideas to the web community, they haven't always gone down particularly well. And I'll talk more about this in a few weeks' time. Other things we'd expect these hypertext to be interactive. What do I mean by that? Well, I don't just mean that these hypertexts have, bouncing graphics and play music at you. What I mean is that these hypertexts could reconfigure themselves in response to contextual changes. So, for example, as you read through a hypertext, when you get to a particular place in the hypertext, the links that you're shown from that place might depend on what you've already seen. You already know about that stuff, so I'm not going to give you a link to that because you don't need to know about it. They might depend on things like your background knowledge. You've told it some profile information, and the hypertext adapts to suit your requirements. So interactivity and adaptivity are key here. The final thing, and this is something which the web actually did far earlier, or far more adeptly, mostly, than other hypertext systems, it shouldn't just be about text. It's not just about the written word, it should be about audio, it should be about video, it should be about images. Now, for some of these things, the web actually doesn't do a bad job, except in one key area, and that is the web isn't great at putting links into other types of media. We can put links into images, we can do that pretty well. How do you put a link into a video? Well, YouTube kind of does that. How do you put a link into a piece of audio? You're listening to, say, a recording of the speech, and at a certain point within that speech, there should be a link that takes you to something related. How does that work on the web? So, hopefully already this will have given you, from your experience of the web so far, the idea that hypertext is more than the web, or it can be more than the web. Now what I want to do for the rest of this lecture is to look at the terminology that we tend to use. Now some of this you may have come across in terms of the web, in which case what I'm going to do is ask you to step back slightly and I'll try and explain how it differs. Yeah.
So I just got a question about the audio. So like on SoundCloud, you can annotate.
Sorry, I should have mentioned SoundCloud. SoundCloud is a system that does that. But
is that the only option?
but this is the thing. SoundCloud is an application that's been built on the web, but the ability to put links into audio files is not part of the core web infrastructure. It's not part of the MP3 spec. Just as putting links in videos isn't part of the MPEG spec, or isn't really part of the MPEG spec. So I agree that there are applications in the web that let you do that, but it's not actually a fundamental part of the web technologies.
Are there technologies that would have that?
I'll talk about that more in a few weeks' time. If you look ahead about 4 or 5 weeks in the lectures, you'll find that I do talk about temporal media. There are there are in places that they're not as expressive as the hypertext systems that are trying to do this, and more to the point, they're not standard, so they're not widely adopted. Good question, though. Okay, so looking at the terminology, the basic hypertext terms that I want to introduce, the three things that I want you to leave this lecture with an understanding of: the notion of a node, the notion of a link, so the four things, the notion of an anchor, and the notion of an endpoint. Now these are terms where you may find that they get talked about a bit in the web. So the web will talk about links and it will talk about anchors. It doesn't really talk about endpoints. It will talk about resources rather than nodes. So what I want to do is to pick apart each of these terms in turn. Now, when we talk about a node, you can think of a node as being a web page. It is some sort of chunk of information that, well, chunk of information that is sort of self-contained and corresponds to sort of a useful unit. How big is a node? Well, this is a place where the systems all vary. If you think about how we see things on the web, sometimes we see very long documents, sometimes we see very small documents. Clearly no one size of node is going to be appropriate for everything, but there is generally a sense in which we don't want these things to be too long. We'd like to be able to break up large documents into fragments that we can reuse and remix in different ways. So the sorts of terms you'll find if you look at historical hypertext systems, you sometimes see these things talked in terms of screens, pages, or frames. And each of these cases, what they're talking about here are typically things that are sort of fixed length. When you look at the web, most documents on the web are not fixed length, they're large scrolling documents. But the point here is this notion that these are a chunk of information, understanding what constitutes a useful chunk is part of the authoring process. So rather than taking a big, 50,000 word document and just sticking that up, do you break it down into smaller pieces that can be interwoven? Why might you want to do that? Well, the nodes that we might have in the system might not be, we might be able to see the contents of more than one node at once, and this is rather different from the web, where with the web typically we can look at one page at a time. We might have multiple tabs open, but it's very uncommon these days to find people that are actually trying to browse the web with multiple windows open at the same time. Things that hypertext systems other than the web can do, they can do things like build virtual nodes or composite nodes. So we could make up a document that's made up of lots of different fragments of other documents, in essence remixing these things. Not something that the web can easily do. Okay, next bit, easy bit, when we talk about a link, it's an association between nodes. As much as I really need to say at this point, because hopefully you've all got that, you all have that idea so far. The only thing I would say, which I've already said slightly, is that links need not be navigable. So we're used to the web in which a link is a bit of blue text and you click on it and you go somewhere else. That need not be the case. A link is just an association between things. And the navigability of it, whether a user can follow it to jump to a different place, is another matter entirely. Links are about structure, rather than being able to follow things. Now, when we have a link, if you look at what the web looks like, how do we know that a link is a link? Typically, how will your web browser try and typically show you that something is a link that you can click on? Could be underlined.
Different colour.
Different colour.
Well, it depends on the browser.
It depends on the browser.
Well, sometimes they will show up as a little thing in the bottom corner that gives you a URL to hover. And also the cursor can change to a hand.
So the point is there are many different ways in which a link could be indicated to you within a text. And once you start weaving in things like style sheets, it very much is down to the author as to how they want their links to appear. Now, when we talk about things in hypertext systems, what we try and do is abstract the notion of a link from the notion of the bit of the link that's present in a document. The link is The link is the arrow that goes between these things. The anchor is the bit of text which might be indicated to you in some fashion that if it were a navigable link, you click on to take you to somewhere else. And if this is a link to part of another document, rather than the whole document, there'll be a corresponding anchor at the other end to which the far end of the link points. So anchors are the sort of representations of a link on a node. We also have the notion of an endpoint. Now, endpoints are a little bit more complex. The endpoint is part of a link that points at an anchor on another node. So let's say we're looking at something here that's like a web page. Here we've got a link that exists within this. We've got an endpoint. So we've got a link between these pages. We've got an anchor. There's an endpoint that's part of that anchor, and that endpoint says where the other end of the link is. Now, on the web, the way that links work is that they're part of the source node. If you want to make a link from one web page to another, what tag do you use in HTML? The A tag. A for anchor, oddly enough. So you'd say href equals, and in here you give a URI that specifies the resource that's going to be the destination of the link. The point here is that this is only one way in which we can construct links. These are what we call embedded links, as opposed to what we might call first-class links. The way these are constructed, it's very easy to write links in a document. It's very easy to write a browser that works with these. But fundamentally, we have links that you can only follow in one direction. So you can only follow your link from this place to this place. You can't practically be here and say, what links to this document? Or at least not without considerable effort. The sorts of links that we have in the web only ever connect a pair of nodes. The place we're going from, the place we're going to. And if we want to point to a particular point in the document, we have to specify the anchor explicitly. So when we create the source anchor of a link, we use something like the A tag and mark up part of that document to say this is the source anchor. For the destination, if we don't want to point to the document as a whole, we have to insert in the destination document, we have to insert another tag in there that we can point at. And typically on the web, links don't contain any other information. I'll talk a bit about how we can expand these things. So for an embedded link, here is my pair of web pages. I've got an anchor here, an endpoint here that refers to that anchor on that node. So endpoints, anchors, and links. If we look at how this works in HTML, here is a fragment of an HTML document. So in here we've got this A tag, and within that we've got the href attribute which contains the URI of the destination of the link. So we could take that href element to be href attribute to be the endpoint, or rather the value of that href attribute. Whereas an anchor would correspond to the whole of this A tag, this A element, and its content. That's our anchor. Okay. What could we do instead? Well, let's think about the downsides of embedded links. If I've got a web page and I want to make a link from that web page to somewhere else, I need to own that web page. I need to be somebody who can make changes to that web page, because there's no way for me to add a link into that web page without editing it. This is what I mean about the web not necessarily treating readers and writers in the same way. Anybody should be able to annotate something, but the web doesn't make that possible. What we can do instead is to say, we're not going to put the links within the nodes themselves. We're going to have first-class links that are stored separately and manipulated separately. This lets us do a couple of things. So the first thing it lets us do is puts us in a position where, because we can create a link without changing a node, we can create links to and from anything. If we can create lots of different sets of links to nodes and from nodes, we can create different groups of links. So let's say you're looking at something like Wikipedia. Depending on the sort of user you are, or the sort of reader of Wikipedia you are, you might like different types of links between articles. If you're, I don't know, a 9-year-old child, you might want a lot of terms explained in a fairly simple fashion. So you might want one particular set of links that basically gives easily digestible definitions for things. On the other hand, if you're somebody that's studying a postgraduate degree at university, you might want links that point to more detailed critical commentaries on the thing that you've read. So what we could do is have different sets of links to different types of people. What we call link bases, a link base being a collection of links. So depending on who you are or what you want, you can put different linking overlays onto documents. So we can do this as a type of sort of personalization. It might be something that we can make a type of task orientation. Depending on what you're trying to do, you see different sets of links. So for a first class link, here we have our two documents as before, our two nodes. I've got anchors indicated on each of these documents. We store our links separately, not part of either document, and the link contains a pair of endpoints. So it contains a source endpoint that says where we come from, and a destination endpoint that says where we go to. And that is the thing that a lot of hypertext systems did, particularly some of the later ones that appeared at about the same time as the web. That's something that they do that the web fundamentally does not. There have been attempts to try and get this into the web, but they've largely been unsuccessful.
How have you certain sort of links integrated into a page? So you're storing all the information somewhere.
Okay, so that's a really good question. How are these links integrated into the page? What this means is that when your hypertext browser looks at a particular node, your browser needs to be able to go away and find out what links have endpoints that refer to this node. So maybe this is a big database of links that exists within the browser, that are your personal links. Maybe you go away to a link server. So you tell the link server the document you're looking at, and it comes back and says, I've got these links that can be applied to that document. So you need another type of entity there that's not just something that serves documents. You need something that serves links and that you can query about links. The nice thing with this is, unlike embedded links, what we have here is symmetrical. So we can make it so that our links are now as easy to follow backwards as they are to follow forwards. Now on the web, following links backwards is quite difficult. Following them forwards is easy. You get a web document, you've got the links in it, you know where to go. Doing it backwards is very difficult. The only people that can really do this are people that have a global index over the web, in fact, effectively a copy of the web, which is how Google does its backlinks. That has issues of scalability. I mean, it's quite a task for one organisation to do. Moreover, it's a centralised component in what should otherwise be a decentralised information system. So having to rely on things like this to provide basic hypertext functionality kind of goes against the grain in terms of what the web was set out to do. If we have first-class links, we can go forwards and we can go backwards just as easily. And the way we can do this is we can annotate an endpoint to say what kind of endpoint is this. Is this an endpoint that's a source? Is it a destination? Is it something bidirectional? So could we go both ways from this endpoint? And there is this question here, how do we find the links that can be applied to a given document? You go to some other sort of server which you can query about a document you're looking at, and it tells you the places you can go to, or the links that apply to that document. So either as easy to go that way as it is that way. We can go a bit further. This link only has two endpoints. What if it had more than two endpoints? Could we build what's called an n-ary link? Now on the web, we can't do this. So you can have an A tag, and it has an href element, but it only has an href attribute, but it only has one of them. So from a given link, you can only ever go to one place. if we have first-class links, we can link many things together. So, for example, we might have something like this. So here is our example as previous with a pair of documents linked by a first-class link. This link might not have one, but two different destination endpoints. So when the user clicks on this, they're given a choice as to which one of these two things they go to. Alternatively, if they're following this link backwards, they can follow it backwards either from the word vivendum or from the word elit. What other sorts of things can we do? And at this point you get into the sort of more high-text research area. One of the issues that we have with the web is that links are predominantly something that gets maintained by hand, and that's a pain. So a few years back I had a PhD student who spent some time looking at Wikipedia and how people edit Wikipedia, and he did an analysis of the edit logs for most of Wikipedia. And the things that he found most people spent their time doing on Wikipedia was not writing articles, it was adding links to articles and adding classifications to articles, so putting them into different groups. The adding links bit is a tremendous cost, because people are having to add all of those links by hand. Is there another way in which we could do this? Well, the hypertext research community looked at this sort of stuff in the late 80s and early 90s through what were called generic links. And generic links is a sort of an overarching term for links where, rather than explicitly specifying an anchor in an endpoint, what we try and do is we identify implicitly an anchor by describing what we want to find inside it. So we describe the text that we want to be linked. It's one of the ways. So in the web, all of our anchors are explicitly specified. The source anchor is the location where we put the A tag. The destination is, well, you know, it's the URI reference that's within the href attribute. So what we can do is we can add what we call location specifiers, lock specs in our endpoints that enable us to give a description of the sort of thing that we want to be linked from. Let's see if I try and show you an example. So here we have our pair of documents, this document, this document. Down here we have a link, and the link will link from any occurrence of the word sit to the word semper in this document. So we effectively could link from this piece of the document, or we could link from this piece of the document. We haven't had to add either of those in explicitly. All we've done down here is describe how we want these things to be linked. And this needn't just work for text. So we could have more complex patterns in here, we could have images where we're trying to link to regions of an image that have a particular feature in them. So this is something that can work for media other than text. We could even be a bit more sophisticated than this. So let's say, for example, we're trying to build up a link base, a collection of links, that link from documents to a dictionary that defines a bunch of terms. Well, we could build that, I guess. We could have a link for every word that appears in our dictionary. Or we could go for an approach called functional linking. The idea here is that the destination anchor, or the destination endpoint on the link, is a function of whatever the source endpoint was. So the idea here we have a link that goes from a word to what we get when we look up that word in the dictionary. So for example, if the user highlighted the word anet and said I want to see a link from this, it will take you to the definition of anet. If instead they highlighted the word yaculus and said, I want a definition of this, we can give them a link to the definition of that word. So rather than having a separate link for each occurrence of each word, we could have one link for the whole dictionary, which is much easier in terms of maintenance. Other things that we could do that the web sort of does, but doesn't really. As I've said, the underlying idea of a link in the hypertext community is not that it's just something you can follow, it represents an association between different things. The thing is, there could be many different types of association. Why are these two things related? On the web, there is a way in which we can put some additional information into a link. So there are these two attributes, rel and rev, that let us sort of, kind of, very imperfectly say what the role of the relationship is from the source of the link to the destination, or from the destination back to the source. The only downside with this in the web is that, well, most authors don't use these things. Very, very few people do, and most web browsers ignore these things. But if we have these things in here, this gives us a way in which we can start to do these sorts of interactivity, this sort of interactivity or adaptivity that I spoke of. So if you know the type of a link, type of the underlying relation, you can decide whether or not to make it visible to a certain user. Or the user could say, actually, I don't want dictionary definitions. So don't show me any links that have a type of dictionary definition. Show me other things. And as I say, all of this comes down to the idea that a link is not just navigation, it's more than that. So here we've got our one of our examples. So here we have a word here that's pointed to by this source endpoint. The destination endpoint is pointing to an entire document, and what we want to do is to add a type to this link that says this thing here is defined in this thing here. And defined in might just be one type of link type. There's a chap called Randall Trigg, who, to the best of my knowledge, still works for Xerox. So worked for the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, which did a lot of the research into hypertext systems in the 1980s. His PhD thesis contained what he considered to be a sort of a complete catalogue of different link types that you saw in hypertexts. And he'd actually gone for a bottom-up approach. He'd analysed hypertext that people had built and tried to classify and categorise the different links that he saw therein. As I say, this is something that the web largely doesn't do. It's getting better. There are some specs out there like RDFA, which is, I'll talk a little bit about link data later on in this course, but it's effectively a way in which you can embed typed associative links into a document so that you can extract structured information from a document. That's about the only place where I can see link types appearing within the web as we currently see it. Okay. So I've tried to give you a sort of an overview of things that hypertext can do, the web doesn't. So, what are your takeaways from this? The hypertext is more than just the web. You know, the earliest thought experiments about mechanical hypertext systems go back to about 1945. These first proper hypertext systems to about 1960, early 60s. The web didn't come along until 30 years later. So there was a big history of people building hypertext systems, and many, perhaps most, of the features that we saw in those hypertext systems aren't evident in the web. Now, there are some people that will argue that the reason that the web is so successful is exactly because those features aren't present in the web, that if you try to put these features in there, it makes the web harder to use, it makes it harder to implement, it makes it harder to scale, to global scale. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of lectures' time. So, if we look at what the web gives us, the web gives us links, but it gives us a very impoverished set of links. We don't have first-class links, all the links are embedded, pretty much. We don't have bidirectional links, unless we want to rely on Google. We don't have any links. We don't have the idea that you can click on a link and being given a choice of places to go to. We don't have things like generic and functional links. We have link types, but they're not something that anybody actually uses, or most people actually use on the web. Okay, any questions about this? I realise I've given you hopefully quite a bit to mull over in this lecture. Yeah.
What effect then do you think the fact that the web has kind of very poor linking system, you can only go forward, what effect do you think that has on actual users of the web? Like
I mean, that's a really interesting question. So, if you had, let's say, if you had bidirectional links built into the web architecture, there are certain types of tool that you would be less likely to see on the web. So the idea of a link checker, something that goes out and goes through your documents to make sure all the links still work, is probably something you wouldn't see quite as much. And in fact, a lot of the early hypertext systems explicitly try to say that you cannot break links. So the idea of a 404 error is something that would have been complete anathema. Now, arguably, that's something that made the web scale. The web accepted defeat on that and said, you know, it's too hard, it's too computationally expensive to make sure that all of the links are always okay all of the time. Whereas some of these systems didn't. They tried to make it so that they were always valid. So that would be one example I could give you. The other thing is, you know, the overhead of link maintenance. We would see people, when editing the web, behave in a different fashion.
Is that what we mean by loose coupling? You can sort of make it's not being maintained in that way, so we try not to perfectly find loose coupling?
Maybe I'd need to think about that a bit more. I think it's a term that you could apply in a way. Certainly, the idea that you are willing to let links break, that also is a loose coupling idea. Whereas the sort of first class versus embedded notion isn't necessarily a loose coupling either way. But you could build things each way that you could consider to be loosely coupled. Any other quick questions? Got another minute?
You could be briefly with defining things. That's like semantic.
Well, that's a very good question.
Or is it functional?
Well, okay, so the defined in.
Because I know that being used.
That was neither functional nor generic.
Right.
That was merely typed. Because it's got an explicit.
So just to give you an idea.
It's got two explicit endpoints, and all I'm saying here is that there is a relation that exists between this thing here and this document, and this is sort of, you know, the conceptualization of that relationship.
So is this been used already, or is this sort of?
As I say, some people do this on the web, but it's very, very few people that do. You find, I mean, the place where you find rel and rev used most often is for style sheets.
Yeah.
In fact,
so that would be embedded in the rel and rev.
Yeah, if I very quickly go to a web page. Yeah, so let me just embiggen this a bit. So here is the module homepage. In the top of the homepage there is a link. So this is a sort of document level link that basically says there is a link that goes from this document as a whole, rather than a particular place, to something else. And there is a rel attribute on here that says, and the type of this relation between this document and the thing represented at this end is that it's a style sheet relation. So it's pointing to the style sheet of this document. That's the place where you'll find it most frequently used, and you'll find it almost never used elsewhere. So it's either very commonly used or virtually not used at all. Certainly, seeing rel and rev attributes on A tags in text is something that you'll not see. Okay, thank you very much. I next get to see you next Monday, and in the meantime you've got Ricky talking about cascading style sheets.
现在可能关等会儿啊，给那个我们约2点半。啊，2点半。8号。2:30 p.m. 2:30. We have a discussion. Okay.